Hello and welcome to Heroic Media. I'm Patrick Cordova.
And I'm Michelle Bauman.
This week on Heroic Media, lawmakers work to defund Planned Parenthood following a series of shocking undercover videos.
India's government lifts a block on public access to hundreds of pornography websites.
The Supreme Court's ruling on marriage is still making headlines. We'll talk with Jenny Kraska about the ruling's implications.
Stay tuned for all these stories and more here on Heroic Media. So here at Heroic Media, we discuss news headlines that deal with foundational moral issues, issues of family, marriage, and life.
That's right, and a lot of times the topics we'll discuss are around abortion, euthanasia, embryonic stem cell research, human cloning, and homosexual marriage.
Exactly.
All right, so what's our first story, Michelle?
Thanks, Patrick. First for tonight, after videos reveal Planned Parenthood officials discussing the transfer of aborted baby tissue for money, some lawmakers have been pushing to defund the abortion giant.
That's good. It's good to see that lawmakers are trying to do something about
Absolutely.
it. I can't tell you, I mean, I've signed like a ridiculous amount of petitions and done a lot of things like that recently, trying to get some sort of like legal process and investigation, whatever I can do to defund Planned Parenthood and put a dent in the abortion industry. But yeah, it's unfortunate though that it went to a vote. Whether or not they were going to vote on the law, and apparently you have to get 60 votes, and they only had 53.
Right.
So it was 53, even though there was a majority, it was 53 to 46. They didn't have the 60 needed to actually discuss it and vote on it.
Right, exactly. So to give our viewers a little bit of background, if you haven't been following this, there's been a series of undercover videos that have been released from this organization. They spent 3 years meeting with Planned Parenthood and pretending to be an organization that wanted fetal tissue for research. And they recorded all these interactions, and now they've been releasing them. And some really horrific findings. You have these Planned Parenthood officials talking about how much they're going to charge per specimen and how they're going to change the abortion procedure to make sure that they get those organs right, seemingly in disregard of the women and the women's safety and the women's health as they're changing this procedure. So just some really nasty things. It's also been bringing to light just the humanity of the child. You know, they're talking about the liver, the lungs, the heart, the cranium. So you're having this description of this human baby. In one of the videos, the nurse says, "Oh, it's another boy."
Right.
So we've seen, you know, a very intense reaction, lots of social media reaction, and then, as you mentioned, the Senate worked on potentially trying to defund Planned Parenthood. It fell short, but it did get the support of the majority.
Right.
So that was very interesting because last time they tried this a number of years ago, it didn't have as much support. So support for this effort to defund Planned Parenthood has been growing.
Yeah, it's good to see that there are at least some people in the Senate that are unbiased and they go, oh, look, even though perhaps I might support Planned Parenthood, what they're doing right now is something that needs to be investigated and we should pull the funding because it's clear what's going on. And so it's good to see that. Something else I thought that was interesting was the vote was largely divided among party lines. Most Republicans voted against it. Most Democrats, the other way around. Republicans voted for it, defunding, Democrats against. But however, there were a couple of Democrats that decided that they wanted to defund, and then there were also a couple of Republicans that decided they did not.
Right.
So I thought that was really fascinating, and obviously it's politics and there's all kinds of implications involved in that, right? Because there's so much money involved in all this, and you know, if you I know a lot of Democrats get, you know, there's all kinds of money between Planned Parenthood and different Democratic people, and so that has implications when you say, oh no, I'm going to vote against Planned Parenthood, basically. So it's interesting. It's too bad that it didn't make it farther. But I know President Obama said, you know, being the staunch pro-lifer he is, that he would shoot down that bill. So even if it got to him, it was never going to see the light of day because of him. So that's too bad. But one of the things that's been so incredible about this whole process, which is, by the way, still is weeks away from being finished. The videos keep being released and released and released, as long as no court orders block them, as there have been. It's just going to be really interesting to see. I mean, every time you see a new video, you're just more outraged, right? And so I feel like the outrage is going to continue building, and that I think so. Yeah, I don't think that we've hit like the peak of the frustration and the I guess the will to try to come up with some law or overturn things. Right, so I don't think the battle is over at all, and so that kind of gives me hope. And you can tell that Planned Parenthood is running scared because
absolutely.
Like all the things that they're posting, like on your Facebook feed, where it's like, oh, trending Planned Parenthood and all this stuff, and you could tell they're like, oh, these people, they try to put people that are against what Planned Parenthood is doing as being like extremists.
Right.
And, these are the same types of people that are like killing doctors and bombing abortion clinics and stuff like that. It's like, well, no, you're just doing some really horrible things, and most decent, common people can see that, and you're mad that it's been exposed.
Right. And they also, Planned Parenthood wrote this letter to Congress after these videos were first released, and they realized that there were more of them. And they said, Congress, we just want to warn you that there could be some videos and they're not real and they've been totally manipulated, but they might seem to show us making racist statements, and they might seem to show the inside of an abortion clinic and the aftermath of an abortion. So they literally wrote this letter to Congress warning, because they realized, oh my gosh, all these conversations were filmed. Right. And so they know what's coming. So there will definitely be some interesting things coming in the future. When we're talking about the amount of taxpayer funding Planned Parenthood gets, it's over $500 million a year.
Yeah.
That's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money.
Last year they got $528 million in taxpayer support. So even though this Senate measure failed, I don't think this discussion is over yet. I think the investigations are continuing. The efforts at both the state level and the federal level are going to continue to try to defund this. So it's an ongoing saga for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And just one last thing before we move on is just that we're not trying to stop women's health care or anything. There's plenty of other organizations and that could completely pick up right where Planned Parenthood left off.
That's a really good point. There's about 700 Planned Parenthood clinics in the U.S., and there's somewhere around 9,000 community health centers.
Exactly.
So Planned Parenthood is trying to say, oh, women won't have health care if you defund us. That's not true. They're less than 1% of the community health centers out there.
Exactly. All right, what's our next story?
The government of India blocked more than 800 pornography websites, citing a social nuisance. But within days, they were met with so much outrage that they decided to reverse the decision.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible. I mean, anytime the whole like free internet thing, like I totally get that. But I also get that you need to protect people, and I think that the government of India has realized via studies, etc., that this is harmful to people, and that this is, like, they just say that it's a nuisance. I don't necessarily quite understand what that means.
It's kind of vague.
Like, is that like mean that's all because of all the internet pornography being downloaded and viewed, it's like causing their internet to slow down, and so it's a nuisance? Like, I don't know exactly what that means, but in one way or another, it seemed like that they were realizing the dangers of it, because they said it led to an increase in like sexual crimes, and then I don't know what other nuisance it was causing, but that seems to be more than a nuisance to me. But either way, they had some reasons, and they said, we need to protect our people, we need to put something in place to stop this, and so they just cut it off cold turkey. So obviously, there's a lot of people that are addicted to pornography, and India is no exception, and that caused a huge outrage, right? And so much so that they ended up having to turn it back on. They left the blocks apparently for child pornography. Right. So at least they did that, but they kept everything else live. Right.
And I think the discussion around this has been very interesting, because what they're saying is, hey, wait a second, that we shouldn't have these kind of blocks on freedom of speech and freedom of expression, those kinds of things. And in one sense, people are saying, well, yeah, that's true, because if our views suddenly become unpopular, what if the government deems them a social nuisance? For example, if the church is teaching on marriage or sexuality, if that becomes a social nuisance, what if they block all of, anything that has
YouTube
the church
video or any website?
That would be a huge problem. And I think where the real distinction comes in here is that this was fueling, as you mentioned, they said they found connections where this was fueling sex crimes, where they're actually finding violent rape and things like that happening as the result of people watching pornography. Right. So that's where the government drew the line and said, hey, we have to step in.
Yes.
And I don't know the statistics in India, but there was a really interesting study at Cambridge University a while ago, and that found that of regular pornography users, over time, 64%, that's the majority, said that their tastes in pornography became more extreme or deviant, and 1 in 5 regular porn watchers said they felt controlled by their sexual desires. So when we're looking at a substance that's this addictive and that's this controlling, you know, the government bans drugs. They have a control on that because it is addicting and controlling people. So that's where I think their claim is coming from, that, hey, we can have this claim on sexual or on free speech because it is causing sexual crimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, free speech is what it's put under, and it's kind of annoying too that it's put under that. But I think one thing to note here is that, you always, hindsight's always 20/20, right? But it's like every time you see these laws get passed or society kind of changing, you're always like, oh man, if we just would have went back and done X, Y, Z differently. And that's kind of how you feel with this, or at least how I feel. It's like, man, if you could just have, just like you mentioned with drugs, you know, there's certain things that, yes, you are free to use those things, but society has deemed them negative, or, you know, negatively impactful to society and to people. And so I feel like it's only a matter of time, but you know, as the effects of pornography addiction become more, you know, more light is shed on them, more studies are done, and the studies that already have been done, more people are aware of them. But you can only, you know, you wish that you could have seen that coming, right, in some way, shape, or form. But you can't, you know. And so now, how do you deal with it? And it is a dangerous thing, you know, especially you know, for myself, like having kids and you know, growing up with the internet. You know, I just have always had the internet pretty much, you know. So and kids nowadays, they just have the internet. They rely on it. It's really
cell phones.
easy.
It's scary.
Cell phones, just connecting to the internet. There's so many different ways you can do it. And so I think as parents and as Catholics, we have to obviously not participate in any of that, but be extra vigilant, especially for our kids, because, you know, families and children are the future. And so the only way to really, you know, you can block the internet all day long, but really you need to have that kind of relationship, and it starts with the family, yourself and the family, and radiates out from there to change society. Because laws and blocking the internet can only do so much.
Right, I agree. There's a social change that needs to happen fundamentally.
Absolutely.
Great. Coming up after the break, the Supreme Court has redefined marriage, and it is still making the headlines. We will go in depth with a special guest next.
Stay tuned. Hello and welcome back to Heroic Media. In case you're just joining us, I'm Patrick Cordova.
And I'm Michelle Bauman. It's been well over a month since the Supreme Court decision that redefined marriage for the entire country. But that news is still being talked about. The implications of it are still being explored.
That's right, and we had the chance to sit down with Ginny Kraska, the executive director of the Colorado Catholic Conference, to get her take on the ruling.
Let's take a look. Jenny, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, guys.
So why is the church so insistent upon marriage being a union just between one man and one woman?
Sure, I think that's a great question, and I think the really simple answer is that that's the truth. I mean, that's what marriage is. We can't, no court decision can redefine for us what marriage is. Long before the church existed, that's what the common thinking on marriage was, that it's one man and one woman.
Right.
And so we can't change that with laws or court decisions or whatnot, so that's why the church insists upon it.
And for the last several years, the definition of marriage has been a very heated topic, people going back and forth on it. And what we see in this Supreme Court decision is we see 5 individuals saying that debate is over for the country, no more debate. We're telling everyone that they're going to accept gay marriage, all the states. Do you see a problem with that for society? Is it good for society when that happens?
No, I don't think it is. I mean, obviously on this decision, people know where the church stands and where I would stand on this. I think it was a wrong decision. I think that the court vastly overreached in their reasoning regarding this issue. Mm-hmm. And on a topic that is so vitally important and foundational to American society, I think that it's really important that we do have a lot of discussion, that we don't leave it in the hands of, at this point in time, 5 justices, because by no means were states decided on this issue. Yes, some states had moved through a legislative process to sanction same-sex marriage, but many states hadn't. And
they were
now,
forced in a lot of cases.
Exactly, or were forced.
Yeah.
And so now they're stuck. I mean, there's nothing. You're right. The discussion has ended on that front, and that's a real shame for America.
Yeah, absolutely. And this, of course, you mentioned, shame for America and how this affects us. And one of the things that stood out too in the decision was their explanation of how, it was good for children. Redefining marriage would be good for children, and that it would make these same-sex couples that are now married, feel, I guess, that their families aren't lesser. Like, what would you say about that line of reasoning for that, and as it relates to children as well?
Sure. I don't think that line of reasoning can really be scientifically or factually backed up. The court didn't provide any of that information for us to say that kids who are raised by same-sex parents are somehow better off than if they were raised by, a mom and a dad. And I think that there's a lot of evidence to the contrary that actually would debunk sort of what they're saying in the opinion. Recently, probably within the last 6 months or so, there's been a woman by the name of Heather Berwick, I believe is her name, and she was raised by 2 moms. And she talks very openly about the fact that she missed something foundational in her life. She loves her mom, she loves her mom's partner, but the fact of the matter is she missed out on something. And that's something that has not been explored in secular society very much. And it took a lot of courage for someone like her to say that.
Absolutely.
But I think with the advent of this decision now, we're going to see more people like Heather probably speak out and say, I missed out on something. And that was foundational to me, and it left a huge hole in my life. And I think for the court just to dismiss that is really disingenuous and naive.
And it's important, I think, to hear that point of view, because it seems like so many times on a lot of the very popular news channels and things like that, is that viewpoint is never conveyed. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely.
It's very one-sided. So you think that, everybody who is raised in a same-sex couple's family, like that they're totally for it. But that's really not the case.
No, it's not at all. And that's what we're finding. I mean, as more and more people start to speak out and have a voice, I think we'll start to see the real consequences of some of these actions and some of these unions. And it's a real shame, because the only people that are hurt in this are our children.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting too, the timing of this. It was so shortly after Father's Day, and just watching on social media on my Facebook feed, on Father's Day, I saw tons of people posting about how every child deserves a father, fathers are so important, and then you have this ruling which is essentially saying fathers are optional, and you can't have 2 women raising a children, and fathers who were so necessary on Father's Day, no, don't need them, that's fine.
Right.
It's an interesting sort of situation there. One other point, in his dissent, Chief Justice John Roberts basically says the majority opinion, the 5 people who were in favor of gay marriage, he says your line of reasoning, there's no reason to stop at 2 people. You could easily have more people. If it's all about love and you love a lot of people, why not all get married? And actually within days after this ruling, we see cases coming in, people saying, hey, I'm going to file a suit because I think I should be able to be in a polygamous relationship and the state should recognize it. Do you see more of that coming?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's no reason to think that, given the majority's opinion, that some people will not try to make a case for polygamy, for marrying your pets, for marriage. I mean, it sounds far-fetched, but I mean, when it's all about love and it's just based solely on who you love or what you love,
a strong attraction,
then there's no reason that couldn't play out in any numerous different
because it's a constitutional right.
Exactly. So I mean, it's who knows what's to come, but it's left the door wide open.
Yeah, and also along the lines of what is to come. The dissenting justices were very concerned about religious liberty and voiced their concern. Right, Justice Alito said that this ruling will use to vilify Americans who are unwilling to assent to the new orthodoxy, and that and to stamp out every vestige of a dissent. And so, what are your thoughts about that? Like, do you see that coming down the line? Do you think it's going to happen pretty quickly, or what do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, within days of the decision, we saw very prominent liberal, left-leaning folks come out very prominently and say any church that does not perform same-sex marriages or does not accept same-sex couples should get their tax-exempt status removed.
Yeah.
I mean, that's huge, and it's huge that that's what they're calling for.
Yeah.
So I think that it's absolutely reasonable to think that religious liberty is going to be under a lot of attack, and this is just the beginning of what we're going to see.
That's how I felt about it, right? Like, and it was like I saw something on like my Facebook feed. It was like, how does this ruling affect you? And it was like basically trying to highlight it's not going to affect you. But clearly, it's already affected people. Bakeries and other business owners that have Christian beliefs that don't want to participate in homosexual marriage are forced to, or they're forced to shut down. And now it could affect, like you were saying, different Christian organizations, churches, schools, and nonprofit organizations, and tax-exempt organizations. So
we're in for a bumpy ride.
We are in for a bumpy ride. All right, thank you so much. Thanks for joining us. We really appreciate your viewpoint and your opinion and bringing that information here. So
thanks for having me.
I think Jenny's comments are so important because this is something that is continuing to affect our nation, and we're not even seeing yet all the ways that this will affect all of us. And so there's implications for the states, implications for religious freedom. It's an ongoing story, and we'll be continuing to cover it here as the weeks and months unfold.
Absolutely. And stay tuned. Coming up after the break, we have one more story. Hello and welcome back to Heroic Media. For our final story, in light of the Supreme Court's decision regarding same-sex marriage, some dissenting Catholic groups are making a push to declare same-sex marriage a sacrament within the Catholic Church. So this, I guess, isn't surprising, but of course when these things come up, there's always going to be some sort of dissenting group, right? That's trying to that claims a Catholic identity but doesn't have a whole lot in common with the Catholic teaching.
Right, exactly.
And so that's what's going on here. So the Supreme Court recently ruled that same-sex marriage is legal, that it's a thing. They basically redefined marriage. Instead of it just being between a man and a woman, it could be between a man and a man or a woman and a woman as well. And so, as we spoke about earlier, the effects of this are going to be unfolding for quite some time. And things are going to take a while to kind of settle down, and we'll see where laws happen and how things really shake down. But one of the implications of this is, of course, some Catholics that maybe don't quite understand the teaching on marriage in the church. They have said, they had a conference recently in Seattle, and they basically came together and said, hey, now that the Supreme Court has ruled on same-sex marriage, we think that it's time for the Catholic Church to, get in step and be inclusive. And, the word that loves to be thrown around nowadays is equality. And so, people that have same-sex attraction in the Catholic Church who are Catholic need to have sacramental equality.
Right.
And so what's your take on it?
I think, Patrick, you nailed it when you said that these are Catholics who don't understand the church's teaching. Because the church says that, hey, marriage is rooted in God and in nature. And so this isn't something that we even have the authority to change. There's some things that the church can change, certain practices, but there's some things that the church doesn't even have the authority to change. The church has always taught, and we have in Scripture this idea of the Trinity. We can't just come along and say, hey, we want to get with the times, we want to change this, we want an extra person. It's actually 4 people in, in the Trinity, not 3. We don't have the authority to change this. We see in nature, we see the complementarity of man and woman and how that is a union that brings forth new life. We see in Genesis how God talks about man and woman. We see how Jesus adopts that model from Genesis. It's very consistent. So the church actually teaches that this isn't something we could change even if we wanted to, even if all the Catholics got together and voted. That's not how it works. So I think these are people, this group, Dignity USA, they disagree with church teaching, and they say, we want the church to change its teaching based on what we want. That's not how the church works.
That's not how the church works at all. And, and I'm glad that it doesn't, right? Because that's one thing that separates the Catholic Church from all other churches is that it believes in objective truth, and that truth has been revealed. And so those truths that have been revealed, like regarding marriage, like you said, regarding the Bible, what Jesus taught, etc., those are things that you just can't change those things. There's no way to change them and redefine them. We don't have the authority, right? And the church does not have the authority. Like you said, the church has the authority to change a lot of different things, like maybe colors of certain vestments and things like that. Those are not moral objective truths that cannot be changed. It's not the same thing. And so I think that society's view has really kind of been some Catholics have been very secularized, right? Because they go to school, they socialize, they watch TV, and they get this view about what love is, what marriage is, and it's completely different from the church. So it's a combination, I think, of probably poor catechesis, but also just kind of being absorbed into what society has to say about these things. And so it's not, it's tough because there's these conflicting viewpoints, but I think if you go back to the base of things, and we as Catholics believe that Christ God sent Jesus Christ to die for our sins, but he also sent him to found a church, which is the pillar and foundation of truth. And he put his Spirit down into the church, and the church guides us on those truths, right, through all generations when new things come up, like in vitro fertilization and other moral questions. And so we have the church to rely on. But it's very clear in Scripture, as well as throughout history, what is the truth on this. And so even if there's a dissenting group that says they're Catholic, that says that they believe that things should be changed, thank God it's not a democracy.
Exactly, and the church has never given in to the changing cultural times. You look at today, things that are just accepted, sex outside of marriage, contraception, divorce and remarriage, those are widely accepted in the culture. The church doesn't change based on what the culture says. I thought this quote really summed it up well. This is from Dr. John Grabowski. He's a moral theology professor at the Catholic University of America out in DC. And he said that this attempt to change the church understanding, it shows a lack of understanding of what the church is and the nature of the church and what the sacraments are. So we really don't see sacraments as something that are for us to define. It's something that is given to us, that's for us to cherish and to protect and to promote. And I think that just really summed it up well. This isn't something that's even on the table.
Right, and I totally agree. And to quote him again, Grabowski, the word discrimination always comes up in these discussions, and he had this to say. He said, "Unjust discrimination is always morally evil, but not all distinction is discriminatory and unjust." And I think we have to remember that as well, because that's what society is saying nowadays, is that men and women, there's no difference, between a man and a woman. And that's just simply not the truth. There are differences. And just because you are saying that men and women are complementary and they're different, that is not unjust or anything like that.
That's not discriminating. That's just distinguishing between sexes.
Exactly. And so, of course, the church is always against these unjust discrimination, but in this case, it isn't unjust discrimination in any way.
Right, absolutely, very important.
All right, that's it for this week on Heroic Media. Please join us next week for all the up-to-date news on the pro-life issues that matter to you.
Please feel free to write to us with any comments, questions, or news tips at news@heroicmedia.org.
And please visit our website at heroicmedianews.org, where you can check out more stories like the ones we discussed on this episode.
That's it for today. Until next time, keep us in your prayers.
God bless.